Beauty. What is it? How would you describe a beautiful person?
According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, beauty is the qualities in a person or a thing that give pleasure to the senses or the mind.
Although the definition of beauty may vary to different people,
one thing's for certain.
beauty affects each of us, sometimes in ways we may not have even realized.
Take into example the 1890s.
The 1890s included the birth of basketball, 1891,
The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, 1892, Utah becoming a state,
and of course, the very common use of blackface, segregation, and lynching.
There was segregation everywhere, from the Louisiana Separate Car Act, passed in July 1890, for the promotion of the comfort of passengers, to the Mississippi Plan to keep African Americans from voting.
From 1890 to 1900, 1,217 Black Americans are known to have been executed by a group for simply being presumed to have committed a crime.
How beauty standards tie into all this is more complex, however. So let's take it back to the 15th century when Africa created a very strange relationship with Europe, which eventually led to the transatlantic slave trade.
At first, Africa would enslave their own people and trade them as punishment for crime, family debt, or for being imprisoned.
Eventually, though, the demand for slaves became too great that when European and American ships offered goods in exchange for slaves, Africans began to kidnap their own people and send them off.
At the end of the Civil War, the 13th Amendment was passed due to the ineffective Emancipation Proclamation.
It stated neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime wherever the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place to their jurisdiction. So boom, slavery abolished and all is well, right? Well, no.
Segregation and discrimination were still very common practices. A huge example of this were the Jim Crow laws in the South.
Jim Crow laws were codes that were found to be constitutional and legal. They varied through states, but they mainly enforced separate but equal facilities.
These laws were sanctified by the Supreme Court in 1896. However, equality facilities were never truly enforced.
These laws required separate railroad coaches, schools, parks, libraries, drinking fountains, restrooms, restaurants, ambulances, and the list goes on and on.
But who even is Jim Crow?
Jim Crow was a character of what was one of the most popular entertainment shows in the 19th century, introduced by Thomas Dartmouth Rice, also known as T. Daddy Rice for some weird reason. Rice traveled through the southern United States around the 1820s and experienced African slaves perform music, dance, comedy, and magic in shows.
These shows were called minstrels. He taught himself the performances in 1832 and in blackface introduced the character Jim Crow to the audience of the Bowery Theater in Lower Manhattan.
These blackface minstrel shows were a tremendous success. White men would perform in blackface to negatively belittle and mock African Americans all over the US, up until the 1890s and the beginning of the 20th century.
So the question is why? Why did they last for so long? Why was it such a trend to make fun of African American features?
Not only was it due to the superiority complex of white people, but it was also due to the general standard of beauty during this time.
Beauty standards were a rooted cause of much of the suffering and ridiculing of African Americans during the 1890s.
This was because the beauty standard for basically forever has been white or pale skin, especially during this era where Victorian England beauty standards were very prominent. Women wanted to have a very pale face, as being dark was seen as being poor.
See the connection? In white people's minds, the idea of darker skin was a sign of labor and poverty and was psychologically implanted.
Women strived to look the opposite of slaves. They wanted such fair skin that they would even poison themselves with ammonia and arsenic in their makeup routines just to not be seen anything remotely like African Americans.
No matter how long or hard we looked, 1890 beauty standards were always a white woman with Eurocentric features. The standard was thin noses, thin jaws, tousled hair, and an hourglass figure.
On the other hand, African American women are usually put into a few stereotypes. One that is still prevalent today is the mammy stereotype, which was created to be a non-threatening image to white women, never to be seen as a sexual being, and be masculine, obese, have an ample bottom, and behind.
These characteristics were chosen to be the complete antithesis of the European standard of beauty, even though most Black women didn't possess them. The mammy was a strategy to implant this grotesque image of African women into the minds of Americans.
This stereotype caused a deep-rooted image of what a Black woman was supposed to look like in society. In fact, there are still many white people who see Black women as mammies today. And although mammies did exist, they were hardly anything like how the stereotype portrayed them to be.
A complete opposite stereotype was Jezebel. Unlike the mammy stereotype, which is depicted to be the least sexual being by rating of any Eurocentric features, Jezebel was a sexually represented stereotype having very Eurocentric features.
A traditional Jezebel was a light-skinned, slender girl with long, straight hair and small features. This stereotype is very, very attractive to white males, leading to many sexual abuse and rape cases towards African American women.
The effect of beauty standards on African American males wasn't much better than for women.
Men's beauty standards in the 1890s was predominantly white features like straight noses, lighter eyebrows, and fair skin. Facial hair was also very popular as men wanted to be more masculine. Unfortunately, black men suffered under this beauty standard because of the ape-like stereotype built by whites.
This takes us back to Jim Crow and blackface. During the time T.D. Rice traveled through the South of the United States, this stereotype was already implanted in the minds of most white people. White people wanted there to be a huge gap in between them and black people. This is mostly why they created this ape-like stereotype.
They described African Americans as apes due to their ethnic noses, large lips, skin color, and hair texture. This is why T.D. Rice created the character Jim Crow by using blackface. Blackface consisted of darkening the skin with burnt cork, leaving an unsettling hole, of exaggerated red lips in the middle to paint them as circus clowns.
This is yet again another example of how white people completely excluded African Americans from the beauty standard, which created a long-term issue of social acceptance. Even now, the effects of white beauty standard on African Americans, which is the stereotypes, are still prevalent in other countries.
Since African Americans are still minorities in places like China, Croatia, Finland, these stereotypes may still be the way the population sees African Americans. Although we have come a long way from the 1890s, these harsh beauty standards are still affecting many groups of people. In fact, many people today still think that the beauty standard is generally Eurocentric features.
What do you think the beauty standard that society created is?
Being fit for both female and male is a big thing, and also having like fair skin and blondish hair color.
It is definitely skinny and white.
It is to be the opposite of ourselves. We are always comparing ourselves to our friends, strangers, people we see on the internet, because society tells us they have admirable traits that we should want within ourselves, even if it's the opposite of what we look like.
The beauty standard in today's society has created self-deprecating images of people across all races and genders, especially in minorities, because our society kind of views whiteness as superiority, as the standard. So you see a lot of people changing their hair, a lot of people bleach their hair blonde, a lot of people change the foundation shade to go lighter, and put highlight to kind of lighten their face and contour their noses to be smaller.
Have a fresh appearance. You shouldn't look dirty. You should look pretty clean and awake, as if you got a good amount of sleep at night. You should have rosy lips and fuller lips. You should not have thin lips and also rosy cheeks. You should have a smaller nose. And for women, you should have bigger hips, since that represents you being more fertile. And for men, you should have broader shoulders, since that represents strength.
I would say the beauty standards of today vary, but they're mostly unattainable and unrealistic. Girls are getting more and more insecure every day of how they look, and as a result, they alter themselves with things such as lip fillers, fake eyelashes, breast implants, gluteal injections, acrylics, and more. Too often do I see girls using filters and other digital enhancers to make themselves look better than they really are. Not only do women suffer with insecurity, but standards on men like height, financial status, and more have made men insecure as well. But I would go as far as to say that women have it worse.
As you can tell, many people are still affected by these standards today. Although the effects may not be as drastic as they were in the 1890s, we believe in the importance of just being who you are and not letting people dictate what you should or shouldn't look like, based on a standard that changes constantly and was created as a way to rank people into groups that will eventually decide how society will treat them.
Thank you for watching our very opinionated segment.